Hey everyone, Michael Hernandez here, and this is Freelance Friday. Today's topic, how to book an orchestra gig. I know for many classical saxophonists, the thought of playing with an orchestra can seem far-fetched and even unlikely. And I want to say that isn't true. In fact, it's actually a lot easier than you might think. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, there's just not a lot written for saxophone and orchestra. And again, that is not true. There are so many wonderful compositions, works by composers such as Prokofiev, Stravinsky, Rachmaninoff, Berio, Bartók, Bizet, Ives, Shostakovich, Massenet, Ravel, Milhaud, and that's just to name a few. There's also obviously the ones that get programmed a lot more, such as Gershwin, Bernstein, Copland. All are great pieces, and I hope that all of you get a chance to play some of these wonderful works. The big question, how do we get orchestras to play these works? Do they play these works? Why not? And if we can convince an orchestra to play these works, how can we guarantee that we are the saxophonist that gets hired for the gig? These are things that we will be exploring today on Freelance Friday. Okay, before you return that tux and cash your check, there's a few things that we need to do before the gig is booked. How many of you were surprised by some of the composers that I mentioned? It's okay. A lot of these composers we don't realize wrote for our instrument because these pieces don't get played. So, I strongly recommend buying both of these orchestral excerpt books, Volume 1 and Volume 2 of The Orchestral Saxophonist, published by Roncourt, and I will put a link to these somewhere below. Once you have your orchestral excerpt books, I strongly recommend that you choose approximately 4 to 5 to focus on. Doesn't matter which ones. This is a great opportunity for you, if you are in school, to approach your private instructor and ask for help, ask for a lesson on these. If they decline, no sweat. I would then recommend that you find as many recordings that you can of these pieces, and that way you get a sense of what is common. What's the performance practice? What is the style? What's the typical tempo that these pieces are played at? It might be different from what's on the page. This will help inform you and get a clearer picture of how the piece is usually approached. I would then ask other faculty at your institution, other woodwind faculty, other orchestral woodwind faculty, such as the oboe instructor, the clarinet instructor, the flute instructor. They will have invaluable experience, and they more than likely will have played these pieces before and could have some really great tips for you. Once you've done that, and you feel even better about how you're playing these, I would look to the local orchestra in your town, in your city, and I would email the principal clarinetist, the principal flautist, the principal oboist, and I would also ask if they would be willing to have a lesson with you and be willing to pay top dollar. The experience will be worth it. It's actually invaluable. It's so important for saxophonists to study with orchestral players, especially orchestral woodwind players, just to get a sense of style. Often that gets ignored in school because as saxophonists, we're so focused on our own solo repertoire, our chamber music repertoire, which is more often than not late 20th century and 21st century music. And it's tough stuff, and it will take most of the lesson time. With that, we sometimes miss out on some basic articulation things, phrasing things. You will get this if you have a lesson with an orchestral player. Once you've had a few lessons and you feel confident in your ability to play these excerpts, I then recommend recording them. It doesn't matter if it's audio or video, but what does matter is the quality of audio. I recommend a Zoom recorder, an H2, an H4, an H6, and if you are in school or you have access to a school, try to get into a concert hall to record these. The space will matter, and you want these to sound as good as you can. If you do choose to do a video recording in addition to your audio, then I recommend looking nice and probably just wearing all black to play it safe. Once you have them recorded, upload them to your YouTube channel and just mark them as private. You will send these off later. The next item on our to-do list is making a resume. This is something quite different than a CV, and this often is what saxophonists get tripped up with the most. We're so used to listing every accomplishment we've ever done, and it's like 20 pages. That's fine. That's perfect to send if you are auditioning for a college job or any teaching job. An orchestral resume is simply your orchestral experience, and it lists your performance experience, and it cannot exceed 1 page. That is super important to realize. It's quite likely that you could get hired for a gig and no one would even see your resume. But we should still plan on having one. It's kind of like leaving the house with matching socks. You can do it. You're pretty sure no one's going to notice, but just to be safe, in case somebody does see, you want them to be the same. We will pretend like someone will be looking at this resume. The first thing, format, again, matters very little here. It's just about content. Really clear your name and your instrument in the top line in a big print, bold. We need to know who you are and what you play. Degree is optional. The next subheading should be ensemble experience. If you have any orchestral experience already, I would lead with that. If not, that is okay. List the ensemble experience that you do have and list the conductors that you worked with. Next little section, any concerti. Don't forget, you know, you're out here networking and you never know. You might be sending your resume to an orchestra in hopes to play American in Paris, but maybe they want to play a concerto instead. I would list any concerti that you've done, the orchestra, the conductor also that you worked with. Then I would go into chamber music experience, any notable performances, any residencies. After that, music festivals, summer music festivals or orchestral camps, anything like that that you've attended and performed in. Really brief. Awards, saxophonists have a lot of awards. If that's something that is important to you, or if you feel like you're lacking in other areas, then I would list those. Again, it depends, you know? Go ahead and list a few of your awards. And the last thing would be references. I strongly recommend not listing 3 saxophone players. You can use 1. If you're fresh out of school, you can use your last primary teacher because they're going to have a lot to say about your playing. But try to think of maybe a conductor or another musician, maybe this person that you studied with, your orchestral excerpts, maybe this person that you took a lesson with in the orchestra. That would speak more highly of your playing. Now that you are armed with quality recordings and a spiffy-looking resume, it's time to go on the hunt. This is the hunter-gatherer portion of this exercise. This is also the most time-consuming. You know what? You're a freelance musician and you're probably just starting out, so you have all of the time in the world. I recommend going to a coffee shop to accomplish this task because it will take all day, and it may take many days. This is the fun part. You will need 3 things. You will need a cell phone, a computer or an iPad, and you will need a notebook, and you will need all 3. Yes, even a notebook. Anyone that knows me or has worked with me in a quartet or has met me for coffee, for a business meeting, knows that I love myself a good composition notebook. I have a notebook from every season that I've been a freelance musician. I fill it up every year. Obviously, phone numbers, conversations will lead to a contract, but it's nice to have a written record. You also want to keep a written record of these kinds of things in email, but a lot of this stuff happens over the phone, and if you haven't written it down and you're talking to many people, you need to keep a record. And I label them and I put them in my filing cabinet back there. For example, this one is from 2012 and 13, and again, it's all filled up. And everything that is in this notebook turns into the following season. So this is 12-13, so that means all of the concerts in 13-14 are referenced in this notebook. So you kind of are always referencing 2 notebooks. It's a system that works for me. The reason I recommend something to write it down with, I do understand that the phone and the computer store a lot of information, but often I will be on the phone while referencing a website, let's say to this orchestra that we're going to talk about, and then I will be writing down information. It works for me. Live your life. You have your notebook, you have your phone, and you have your computer. Now you need to find your coffee shop. And this is where you will spend the day and maybe several days. And that's okay because this is now your job. You need to wake up early, you need to get your practice in, and you need to build your career. And this is how we start. I like going to coffee shops because I don't like staying home all day. And if you can't afford Wi-Fi, that's a real consideration. The research portion. You need to find out every orchestra in your area. Now, this can mean different things for different people. If you are living in a big city, there are many, many regional orchestras near you, and you might not even need a car to get to them. Find all of those. You might not have a car if you're living in a big city like San Francisco or New York. If you are living in a more rural area, that's okay. As a freelance musician living in a rural area, you are probably already used to having to drive for a gig. So this is, how far are you willing to drive or travel for a gig? And if that means you're okay traveling up to an hour, then you need to search an hour radius from where you live and hit up every orchestra that is within an hour's distance, whatever that is for you. Now, if you are living in a rural area, it's something else to consider. Is this the right career for you? You know, is there enough work to sustain your career? These are all things that you need to consider. So what I like to do, I was going to show you an example. You're looking up an orchestra, you go to their website. Let's say you find, I have written here, the M. Hernandez United Symphony Orchestra. The first thing you need to do is identify the conductor. You want to find is some information. You want to find their name, if they conduct or work anywhere else, if they're still a performing musician, and if so, what organizations do they play in? Is there a phone number or email listed for that conductor? Most often, there isn't. What will be listed is an office number for the orchestra, and usually the person that answers that is a very lovely volunteer working from home, and they can tell you the price of that weekend's concert, and they can tell you about parking, and they love to tell you that they cannot give the conductor's information out anymore. So we will no longer be calling her or him. Keep that orchestra number just in case you do need some logistical information. What probably will be listed if the conductor's contact info isn't listed on the website is a direct link through a bio or maybe even Instagram or Facebook to the conductor. There are ways of finding that conductor's information, and you have the time, and it's important that you do that, and you're going to see why soon enough. What you're doing here, this is called networking, and networking gets a bad rap. And it's because often classical musicians, while we spend our life on stage, we sometimes are a little shy and a little introverted, and that can hinder us severely, because we think of networking as maybe being too much or kind of gross, and it can be for sure. I like to think of networking more like building a web, because if you're watching this video, it's because either you've recently decided to start a freelance career or you're already on that path, but you need some guidance. Often this happens when you graduate school with a music degree and you're like, what do I do now? Or maybe you've relocated to a city, and I've done that 3 times. This is my 3rd city where I've essentially had to start over from scratch. It's all about building community and finding other musicians that you can collaborate with. That's really all this is about, because at the end of the day, musicians want to just help other musicians. And it's easy to think that that's not the case. You know, when you're going to music school, you're pitted against one another. You're competing. You're in a practice room by yourself, trying to be the best, and you lose sight of what this is all really about. And it's about community. Musicians, especially when they're starting out, tend to come from a place of scarcity, a fear of poverty, and that's a very real fear. And I think that you kind of have to view life as a little bit more abundant, and that there are jobs for everyone, and everyone has a right to work, and you have the right to work, and you have the right to have a lot of jobs. And the more good vibes that you can put out there, the more good vibes that will come your way. You're looking up the conductor. Next, the personnel manager. Who is the personnel manager? Well, the personnel manager is the person that will be hiring you and sending you your contract. You need to find out that person, their name, their email, maybe a phone number, maybe their website, where they play. Do you know them? Have you worked with them? Has anybody that you worked with them? That could be helpful. Perhaps the principal clarinetist of whatever orchestra that you took a lesson with on the excerpts. Maybe they know that person, and maybe that orchestra member could put in a good word for you. These are all important connections in building your new web in your new city or your new life or your new career. And it's important that you realize that these connections are important. Next, is there a musicians page? Often on the website, there will be a musicians page. This is a good place to look to see if you know anybody in the orchestra already. Have you worked with anybody? Is there a saxophonist listed? Sometimes there is, and that's good to know too. Are there any auditions happening? The next thing you want to look at is the repertoire this orchestra plays. Are they a new music ensemble? Are they more of a traditional symphony? And you can find this by looking at their current concert season as well as all of their past seasons. Do they ever play 20th century music? Do they play 21st century music? And even though there are some pieces that were written in the 19th century that include saxophone, you want to find out if they've programmed anything that has used saxophone before. If so, when and what. You want to write that down because it will be a good reference. Like I said, you'll be able to go back to your 2019, 2020 notebook maybe in 3 years, and maybe it's time that that orchestra plays that piece again. You see what I'm saying? Under the musicians page, if you did find a saxophonist, do you know that person? Why not? You should. You guys play the same instrument and you are now in the same city. You want to reach out to that person maybe. You want to buy them a cup of coffee if you're new to that city, and you guys can swap stories. You can maybe swap information. Even if you don't have anything that you feel that you can offer. Let's say this saxophonist is very well established and kind of at the end of their career, and you're just starting and you feel like I have nothing to offer this great person. There's something. It's more the thought that counts. Maybe you have a new etude book that you could lend the person or tell them about, or maybe you have some mouthpieces they would like to try. Saxophonists are the biggest gearheads. There is something that you can offer. It's important that you're willing to do that. You never want to come across like you're just using people, because people can sense that, and it's done a lot. And it kind of grosses people out, and it should, because it's a gross thing. Is there a sublist? This is something that you can ask the personnel manager, and you can also ask that saxophonist that you're taking out for a date. It's very possible that that saxophonist, while he is that orchestra saxophonist, he might have another gig that comes up the next time that orchestra contacts him. So, you know, it's totally reasonable to ask to be placed on that sublist, either by asking the saxophonist or asking the personnel manager. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Next, what repertoire are they playing next season? Is it listed? This will often be listed by June for the following season. There will usually be some sort of countdown starting in April, because the orchestra needs to entice their subscribers to resubscribe, and they kind of make a big deal about the unveiling of the new season. So just check back. Keep in mind, you don't want to forget to keep checking back, because you want to see if they are programming anything with saxophone the following year. And the sooner that you can do that, like if the repertoire gets announced on June 1st and June 2nd, you are contacting that orchestra about that playing the saxophone part in that piece, that's what you want to do. Because now there's a lot of you watching this video, so it's like a race, right? So you want to be the first one if you want to have a shot at getting that gig. My notebook looks like this. I have my conductor information, I have the personnel information, I have the musicians page information that I've documented. I've documented that this orchestra plays mostly old stuff, 20th century some, any recent past works of saxophone, yes or no. Sax music, yes, okay. Who was the saxophonist? Were they listed? You want to list their contact information. Because when you've had, you've collected information on 20 of these orchestras, you're not going to remember it all. And I'm not going to want to look at my phone or computer, just me. I want to look in my notebook. Let's see. And then you want to have their next season's rep. It looks like they're playing a lot of Beethoven, Mahler, Beethoven. John Williams Summer Pops concert. Perfect. That concert is more than a year away, so no reason why you should not be playing the saxophone part. Okay. Now you do this for every single orchestra. Understand? Every single orchestra in your area. This is why it takes a while. Hunting down this information on one orchestra could take up to maybe 3 hours. So times that by however many orchestras you want to play with. But good news is you have it, it's documented, and it's yours forever. You are now ready to contact each orchestra that you researched. You write 2 emails for each orchestra. The first email goes to the conductor and the conductor alone. And remember, you would have found this email address by looking up the conductor's personal website. Somehow, it can be done. Usually the conductor is also the artistic director of the orchestra, and if they are very passionate about programming a piece, keep in mind this can be a concerto as well, that piece will make it on the next season's program. At the end of the day, the season is determined by a board of directors, but the artistic director, the conductor, has a huge say in what gets programmed. The email needs to be very short and very sweet. Conductors are very, very busy, so you want to be pleasant but direct. In your subject, it needs to be very clear, so that if they ever need to search for your email, like if they don't know your name, because they probably won't, but they can recall your email maybe 7 months later, subject could include something like saxophone, John Williams, summer concert, something like that. So I like to make my subjects very clear, capitalized. This one would probably be 20-21/saxophone. That tells you it's the 2021 season. Saxophone, John Williams pop concert. Perfect. I know how to find that email. You are going to keep it very short, very simple. Dear Maestro so-and-so, my name is blankety blank, I play the saxophone. I'm new to the area, or, just graduated from the School of Hard Knocks, whatever. And I see that next summer you are performing a John Williams concert, and I saw that the piece includes the saxophone. So-and-so suggested that I contact you. Now, this can be the person that you may have connected with at your lesson over the excerpts. It could be the saxophonist that you connected with, somebody that maybe you know. And if not, that's okay. You can leave that part out. Doesn't matter. I didn't see that there were any upcoming auditions on your website. I would love to be considered for the sublist or the chance to audition for the part. I'm attaching my resume and 3 orchestral excerpts for you to listen to at your leisure. Thank you so much, blankety blank. The next email will be addressed to the personnel manager, and you will want to CC either the person that you know in the orchestra. Again, we're talking about that person you had a lesson with, or the saxophonist. Often I find that somebody in the woodwind section is great, because usually, and again, this is just my own experience, a principal player in the woodwind section is usually charged, and it's often the clarinetist. They're usually charged with finding the saxophonist. And you want to make this so easy for them. So I would CC maybe a couple of the principal woodwind players, like the principal clarinetist and the principal flautist. Again, this is just my own experience. I know that people might see this and be like, this guy's crazy. I'm just saying, this has been done and it works. And you basically write the same email. I see that you're playing this and this. I'm new to the area. I would love to be considered for the sublist. I would love to be considered for an audition for the part. Here is my resume, and here are a couple of samples of my playing. And then it's a waiting game. You have to just wait. Sometimes you'll hear back, sometimes you won't. Sometimes you will hear back several years later, a couple seasons later, that you would have thought that this conductor or this orchestra just they don't care anything, about you, about that you play saxophone, or they're never going to program something, and then they end up programming. And sometimes you get 5 of these calls for the same season, and it's just crazy. But this is part of it. This is part of being a freelance saxophonist, and this is kind of what you have to do. You have to get used to rejection, and you have to get used to waiting. What we're doing here is we're planting seeds. And sometimes you might plant an onion and it shoots up right away, and sometimes you might be planting a ginger and it just takes a really long time to sprout. And that's why you plant all sorts of different crops, because some shoot sooner and some take a little longer. These tend to take a little bit longer unless you're very, very proactive. And you can be. And the more orchestras you contact, the more opportunities you have. It's kind of, I hate to be crass, but it's like Tinder. The more people that you swipe yes to, the more matches you'll make. If you're very selective and only swipe on the people that you think that, you will spend the rest of your life with, that could be like 0 in a week. You will not match with anybody that week. It's that simple. Congratulations, you got the gig. Now, how can you ensure that you'll be invited back and that the gig goes well? This is similar to being invited to a party. You want to make sure that you arrive on time. You want to know when to leave. You want to be invited back. You want to make sure you say thank you and that you make a very good impression with everybody at the party, especially the host and hostess. Okay, here's what I would recommend. Saxophone has a very small part. Usually it's a solo, so that's fun. And your pay will be the same. It's a principal pay, so that's even better because at least you don't have to be there for the full service. You can kind of go in and play your solo and leave. Do you do that? That's the question. Okay, if it's your first time playing in an orchestra, I recommend going at the beginning of the rehearsal to the first rehearsal. Hopefully your piece isn't first. This allows you the time to watch the conductor, and you can sit in the audience or backstage or whatever, somewhere where you can watch the conductor, because as saxophonist, we are not usually watching a conductor. We are playing chamber music, we are playing solos, we are playing concerti, in which case the conductor is following us. And if you're just starting out, the last conductor you would have had is in your wind ensemble from college. And wind ensemble conducting, which we're all used to, is so great, and it's so different from orchestral conducting. And that can be a scary feeling too. Strings respond differently, orchestral conductors conduct differently. And the best way to get used to that is to watch the conductor that you will be working with. So I recommend going early to that first rehearsal. And if you can get a score on IMSLP, the piece that they are playing, which you will have all of that information from the moment you sign the contract, it's just part of doing the homework. I would get that score and I would follow along with what you see because the information will be different. I've been in situations where I'm in the orchestra and I realize midway through that the woodwinds are all following one designated person in the woodwind section because that person has a really good sense of what that conductor is doing, and everyone else in the woodwind section kind of is not really understanding that, so they just follow that one person. In this case, it was the principal flautist. And I thought, oh, I'm watching the conductor, but there's like a delay because you're hearing the strings a little bit later or sooner than what you're seeing. So you just want to get a sense of how that orchestra functions, and every orchestra and every conductor functions differently. So I recommend that first rehearsal, getting a good feel. You want to get there early anyways because you want to be professional and you can't be late and you can't afford to mess this opportunity up. So have your best read, get there early, watch and learn. Count like crazy. It's going to be so much fun. After that first rehearsal, usually because you're a soloist and the orchestra is always so sweet, they will want to talk to you at the break. You're timing it so that you can your piece is being played and it coincides with when their break is. It's very tempting to kind of sit in your chair because you might not know anybody and to practice or fix your read. It's really important that you do socialize. Nobody knows you either, and you can't expect some people to just come up and talk to you. And this is how other gigs can happen. Have your business cards with you. Everybody does. But do not give it out unless somebody asks for it. Everyone has their cards with them and everyone knows that they have their cards. There's no point in giving them unless they want them. And it's very, very possible and extremely likely that somebody in that orchestra is a personnel manager for another orchestra. That's happened to me before too, and that person could have loved your playing and come up to you and be like, oh my gosh, do you have a card? Because, I'm the personnel manager for XY orchestra and we're desperate to find a saxophonist. Then you give them your card. And that wouldn't have happened if you looked like kind of a loner or you looked like you were unhappy and you're just practicing. You seem unapproachable. Go out there, have coffee, eat that cake, whatever the union rules are. You're getting that break for a reason. Lastly, at the end of that first rehearsal, it's very important that you thank the personnel manager for having you and that you talk to the conductor and thank them for having you. You want to make that connection, but you want to be invited back, and you want them to realize how rare this experience is and how much you appreciate it, because you do. And that, again, just to being a good guest, you are a guest with that orchestra. So leave the ego at the door and make the best music that you can. And that's how you get invited back. I hope you found that information useful. It was a lot. Let's unpack it and recap. First things first, learn your excerpts, take some lessons on them, record them, upload them to YouTube, make a resume. Hunt and gather. You want to get your notebook, your coffee, your computer, your cell phone, and you want to gather information on all of the orchestras in your area. Just like I showed you, document that in your notebook. Next is making contact. You write those 2 emails to each orchestra, one addressed to the conductor, the other email addressed to the personnel manager, and CC a woodwind player, probably the principal clarinetist. And then you wait. Let's say you get the gig, you sign the contract. Next comes your first rehearsal. You want to get there early and you want to be a good guest. You want to scope out the situation, get familiar with the conducting style, be friendly, try to meet some people, have a good time, make the best music you can. You're going to love it. And hope to be invited back. And if you follow all of these suggestions, you will be invited back. And please let me know when you book an orchestra gig. I would love to hear it, and I would love to see what the experience was like for you. All right. Please leave the comments below. Like the video if you found it useful. Subscribe to this channel. This is really fun for me, and I hope that all of you are staying safe out there and have an amazing time booking concerts for your future. Take care. See you next Friday.